Hello and welcome, my dear YouTube audience. You're tuned into Crime Whisper, the channel where true crime meets gentle storytelling. I'm here to guide you through another case tonight, one that is both tragic and complex. But before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. Now, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Alright, let's get comfortable, relax, and ease into tonight's case. Carol Nicole Maltz was born on September 19, 1995, in a quiet province in Italy. Her parents, Fabio and Josephine, came from different backgrounds, her mother Italian, her father of Dutch descent. When Carol was just a small child, her parents separated. Her father returned to the Netherlands, remarried, and started a new family. Meanwhile, Carol stayed in Italy with her mother. Josephine raised her daughter alone, working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. They lived in a modest community called Cesto Kenda. Despite their struggles, Josephine ensured that Carol had access to a good education and meaningful opportunities. Carol blossomed into a bright, sociable young woman. She had a natural charm, was active in sports like horseback riding, and spent her evenings at a local dance studio. Fluent in 3 languages and passionate about books, Carol could hold a conversation on almost any subject in her late teens. Carol enrolled in a technical university to study industrial design and fashion. But during her first year, her life took an unexpected turn. She became pregnant after falling in love with a fellow student studying architecture. Although unprepared for motherhood, Carol chose to keep the baby. In 2016, at just 20 years old, she gave birth to a son. Financially strained, she left university and moved to Verona to find work. She found employment as a sales consultant for a cosmetics chain, while her boyfriend cared for their child at home. By 2019, life shifted again. Carol began a passionate affair with a man named Angelo. For 6 months, they met in secret hotel rooms, late-night messages, stolen moments. But eventually, her partner discovered the infidelity and ended their relationship. Carol saw it as a fresh start. She had planned to move in with Angelo, but they ran into obstacles. Angelo still lived with his parents, and they were reluctant to accept Carol and her child. With little choice, she moved in with Angelo's family while her son stayed temporarily with his biological father. Life was difficult. Her mother had been diagnosed with Parkinson's and needed costly treatment. Desperate to support both her mother and her son, Carol turned to the internet. She started a YouTube channel where she spoke about loneliness and survival, though her content didn't gain much traction. Her striking looks drew attentions, some of it unwelcome. One suggestion from a viewer would change everything. Try creating content on At first hesitant, Carol eventually took the plunge. Under the alias Charlotte Angel, she began posting intimate content. To her surprise, her following grew rapidly, and soon she was earning more than she ever had before. The content gradually became bolder, yet she kept this side of her life hidden from her boyfriend Angelo and his family. That secrecy didn't last. An acquaintance recognized her. Word spread. Friends pulled away. Carol defended her choices, calling her work empowering and artistic, but others saw it differently. Still, the income allowed her to stabilize her finances. Adult film studios took notice, and offers poured in. Eventually, Carol accepted. Her boyfriend Angelo was devastated when he discovered her secret. Though he didn't immediately leave her, his parents insisted he cut ties. In the midst of this, Carol voiced hopes of finishing school someday, maybe becoming a model or designer. But the work was addictive, creative, liberating, and lucrative. She later moved to a town near Milan, hoping to start fresh. She left the industry briefly and worked at a perfume shop, but that didn't last. Soon after, she met David Fontana, a 42-year-old banker and hobbyist photographer. Their connection was intense. David, though married, pursued Carol and convinced her to return to adult content creation. Their relationship turned romantic, then businesslike. He filmed her content and took a cut of the profits. Jealousy brewed beneath the surface, especially when Carol's ex, Angelo, tried to reconnect. Carol refused to get back together, but they stayed in contact. David found out and reacted with threats and violence. He even set Angelo's car on fire, though police couldn't prove it was him. Still, Carol's star kept rising. She traveled for work, received international offers, and dreamed of buying a home for herself and her son. To reach that goal, she began creating customized content scripts and videos tailored for fans. It was profitable, but draining. She and David continued to collaborate professionally, even after ending their romantic relationship. But behind the scenes, the pressures of judgment, emotional isolation, and moral condemnation wore heavily on her. And as the shadows grew longer, something far more sinister would unfold. Case of Carol. Nicole Maltz. In September 2021, during a film shoot, Carol met a fellow performer named Salvatore Galdo. Their on-screen chemistry blossomed into a real-life romance. Over time, their relationship deepened, and they eventually decided to get married, carefully taking the time to make sure they were both emotionally ready. Unlike past relationships, they approached this one with caution and maturity. Both Carol and Salvatore agreed to maintain a sense of independence and keep their relationship out of the public eye. They had learned the hard way how fragile love could be under the glare of scrutiny. Together, they built a strong foundation, leaving behind the chaos and entanglements of their past. Carol's online presence began to fade. She rarely posted, and when she did, her captions were brief. One of her last photos hinted at a peaceful seaside vacation, but she hadn't told anyone where she was going. Then came the turning point. On March 20th, 2022, a man hiking near the cliffs outside the Italian town of Borno stumbled upon what he thought were black bags of garbage dumped along the shoreline. Upset by the sight of pollution in such a beautiful area, he approached to clean up. But one bag seemed unusually heavy. When he tried to move it, a tear revealed something horrifying: a human hand. He called the police immediately. When authorities arrived, they discovered 4 bags each containing human remains. The body had been dismembered into 18 parts. It had been kept in cold storage, then dumped down the cliff in hopes that time and nature would erase all traces. But the bags had torn upon impact, revealing their grisly contents. The victim's identity wasn't immediately clear. She had no ID, and her tattoos had been severely damaged, burned, cut, and partially dissolved with chemicals. Still, forensic teams managed to reconstruct some tattoo fragments and shared them with the public, hoping someone would recognize the artwork. Soon, a woman from the adult film industry came forward. She recognized the tattoos, though she only knew the victim by her stage name. Charlotte Angel. This lead helped investigators trace her real identity. The victim was Carol Nicole Maltz. The investigation took a sudden turn when it was revealed that Carol had recently been engaged to Salvatore Galdo, but Salvatore had never reported her missing. Authorities brought him in for questioning. Salvatore appeared genuinely devastated. He explained that he had been in touch with Carol via text and social media. According to him, Carol had told him she was unwell, and when asked why he hadn't tried to visit her, he claimed that a mutual acquaintance, David Fontana, who lived nearby, had promised to check in on her, though Salvatore's story seemed muddled. It led police to their next suspect, David Fontana. Before officers could reach him, David arrived at the police station on his own to report Carol missing. He hadn't seen the news and was unaware her body had been found. When he realized the truth and that Salvatore had already been questioned, he began to panic. Initially, David claimed that he and Carol hadn't spoken in months, but under pressure, his story unraveled. He grew visibly nervous and contradicted himself repeatedly. After several hours of questioning, David finally broke down. he confessed. David claimed that Carol's death was the result of an accident. He told police that during a custom filming session for a paying client, he had tied Carol up, gagged her, and placed a bag over her head, all according to a script. They had agreed on simulated violence, he said, but he accidentally struck her too hard with a hammer, fracturing her skull. Seeing that she was dying, David claimed he delivered a final blow to end her suffering. But investigators discovered that the client didn't exist. The entire scene had been orchestrated by David himself, using a fake profile to commission a violent script. He had planned everything. On January 11, 2022, he murdered Carol. The next day, David used her credit card to purchase a large freezer, as well as a saw and axe from a hardware store. He dismembered her body, attempting to destroy identifying features with chemicals and fire. For the next 2 months, he stored the remains in his home freezer. During that time, David used Carol's phone and social media accounts to impersonate her, sending reassuring messages to friends, family, and even Salvatore. His deception worked. No one reported her missing. Had anyone raised the alarm sooner, authorities could have traced her phone, which remained with David the entire time. Eventually, believing enough time had passed, David drove to the cliffs near Borno and dumped her remains, thinking they would never be found, but they were. Within days, authorities closed in on David. He was arrested and charged. At trial, he claimed he loved Carol and that her death was unintentional. He told the court he planned to take his own life after what happened, but the claim rang hollow. On June 12, 2023, David Fontana was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The court ordered him to pay €350,000 in compensation to Carol's mother, her son, and the father of her child. Surprisingly, the dismemberment of Carol's body was not considered an aggravating factor, nor was the cruelty of the act. As a result, David may one day be eligible for parole. After falling deeply in love during a university break, Catherine Wellsberg made the life-changing decision to move to the UK with her partner, Rafal Novak. His calm, trustworthy demeanor allowed her to feel completely at ease, opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone before. Within just a few months, Catherine introduced Rafal to her family. Her parents were warm and welcoming, quickly embracing Rafal and supporting the relationship. They hoped for nothing more than a bright and happy future for their daughter. Catherine, meanwhile, was thriving. She had recently graduated with honors from Bath Spa University in 2011 and had already secured a promising role as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the manufacturer of the iconic Henry vacuum cleaners. Sharp, educated, and emotionally intelligent, she quickly earned the admiration of her peers. Her co-workers described her as someone who truly cared, an attentive listener who supported others even through their personal struggles. With her radiant smile and naturally kind demeanor, Catherine was seen as a rising star and a natural leader. Together, she and Rafal were building a beautiful life. Their combined incomes allowed them to purchase a spacious home with a terrace on Willow Way. Though financially stable, they still chose to take out a mortgage and, following bank requirements, secured life insurance policies, naming each other as sole beneficiaries. With successful careers, shared goals, and youthful optimism, it seemed they had everything they needed for a happy future. But on the morning of September 12, 2012, everything changed. That day, a man named Orlando was returning home from a night shift at a gas station, rushing to take his daughter to kindergarten. While driving, he noticed thick black smoke rising from a nearby parking lot. Taking a sharp turn, he came upon a car fully engulfed in flames. Firefighters arrived within 4 minutes, but by then, the vehicle had been completely consumed. The charred shell gave no immediate clues. Police quickly cordoned off the area. It was early, and there were no witnesses. Inside the vehicle, investigators found a burned human body. There were no signs of a collision or any involvement of another vehicle. At first, authorities suspected an accidental fire, perhaps a malfunction, but they needed answers. The remains were sent to a forensic lab. At the same time, police checked recent missing person reports. That same day, Rafal Novak filed a report for Catherine. He told officers that he had left for work around 5:30 a.m. while Catherine was still asleep. When she didn't arrive at work and wasn't at her parents' home either, he became concerned and called the police. The body was soon identified as 23-year-old Catherine Wellsburg. Police began building a timeline, interviewing Catherine's parents, sister, friends, colleagues, and of course, Rafal. Bit by bit, the story of her last days began to take shape. But as investigators dug deeper, disturbing truths began to emerge. Rafal, it turned out, had not been the man he claimed to be. Originally from Poland, Rafal had left behind a former wife and child, fleeing to the UK to escape a trail of unpaid debts. Upon arriving in England, he began a long-term relationship with a woman named Anna Lennox, which lasted from 2008 up until he met Catherine. For a time, he maintained relationships with both women, but eventually chose Catherine, not out of love, but because she offered stability, a solid career, and financial promise. Catherine, unaware of Rafal's double life, was planning a future filled with love and trust, but Rafal had darker intentions. Police would later uncover that Rafal was secretly plotting Catherine's murder by greed and a desire to collect her life insurance payout and take ownership of their shared home. His plan had been set in motion months earlier. On the day Catherine disappeared, Rafal feigned worry and panic. He told her family and colleagues that Catherine had been receiving disturbing letters from a mentally unstable admirer, he claimed. She had been emotionally distressed and afraid. He told a convincing story. He even recounted their last night together, a walk, a quiet dinner, television, and then bed. Catherine, he said, was calm and relaxed, but the autopsy told another story. Catherine had been strangled around 2 a.m., most likely in her sleep, and then placed in her own car. Her body was driven a short distance and set on fire, an attempt to destroy all evidence. Rafal initially appeared to have an airtight alibi. He had clocked into work by 5:30 a.m., and the burning vehicle was found shortly after 6 a.m., but surveillance, footage, phone records, and witness reports placed Rafal at home as late as 1:30 a.m., closing the gap investigators needed. He quickly became the prime suspect. Rafal then spun a new story. He claimed Catherine had been stalked, but the truth was even more complex. Investigators discovered that Catherine had maintained secret accounts on adult websites, where she shared intimate photos and chatted flirtatiously with strangers. A letter from a supposed secret admirer was found among her things. Rafal tried to use this information to throw off the investigation, but it only raised more questions, and then the real motive surfaced. Not only had Rafal and Catherine taken out life insurance policies worth £123,000, but Rafal had been in frequent contact with Anna Lennox, meeting with her regularly in the months before Catherine's death. Security footage revealed even more. Days before the murder, Anna and her uncle, Tadeusz Dimitron, had been spotted filling a gas canister at a local station. Phone records showed Catherine had messaged Anna's phone on the day she vanished. The police now had 3 suspects: Rafal Novak, Anna Lennox, and Tadeusz Dimitron of planning and executing a premeditated murder, followed by arson to destroy evidence. Together they had built a false narrative. They created fake dating profiles using Catherine's photos, portraying her as promiscuous. They sent messages to a fictitious lover from her phone. One conspirator even texted from her number, suggesting she was on her way to meet someone the night she died. But forensic teams revealed the truth. When the fire broke out, Catherine was wearing only her favorite nightgown, an outfit for a secret rendezvous. She had likely died in her sleep, unaware of the betrayal taking place around her. Even in the face of damning evidence, Raffel refused to accept responsibility. He continued spinning lies, telling Catherine's mother that her daughter had been receiving threatening emails from an ex-boyfriend. He even claimed Catherine had spoken of taking her own life. In a final act of cruelty, he allowed Catherine's grieving parents to comfort him, pretending to mourn with them, knowing full well he had orchestrated her death. Raffel Noak's deception ran so deep, even Catherine's grieving mother believed he too was mourning her loss. His performance was so convincing that Jane, overwhelmed with sorrow, embraced him and even allowed him to call her mom. At the time, the police regarded Raffel more as a witness than a suspect, and Jane reasoned that if her daughter had loved him that much, then he deserved their support. But when the trial began under Justice Sharp, the horrifying truth unraveled. The jury learned that Raffel and his co-conspirators stood to gain significantly from Catherine's death: a £123,000 life insurance payout and half ownership of a modest two-bedroom home in Mangold, Somerset, valued at £137,000. When police discovered Catherine's burned body in her car on the morning of September 12th, Raffel displayed no emotion. Meanwhile, his lover and co-defendant Anna Lennox frequently scoffed and shook her head in court at any suggestion of her guilt. She refused to testify, as did her uncle and third co-conspirator, Tadev. None of them took the stand in their defense. Justice Sharp didn't hold back during sentencing. He described the crime as horrific and merciless. Raffel showed no reaction as the judge addressed him directly, condemning the murder as one committed purely for financial gain, marked by aggravating factors and devoid of any mitigating ones. Anna Lennox was branded deceitful, manipulative, and cruel, with the judge affirming that she played a critical role in orchestrating the plot. Tadev, her uncle, was likewise held accountable for his part in helping dispose of Catherine's body. Catherine's mother, Jane, said the callous and calculated nature of her daughter's murder would haunt her forever. She regretted never getting to say goodbye, never getting the chance to tell her daughter one last time that she loved her. Now, she says, she sees Raffel for what he truly is: evil. Her father, Philip, echoed the betrayal. They had treated Raffel like a son, welcomed him into their home, fed him, trusted him, only to be met with this brutal betrayal. In court, Raffel wept and insisted on his innocence, claiming he was being scared. But his behavior after Catherine's death painted a different picture. Jane Wellsberg recalled that after his initial release from custody, Raffel came over and asked for a steak dinner, never once mentioning Catherine. She now believes Catherine sealed her fate the moment she and Raffel purchased a home together and took out that life insurance policy. In her words, by signing that contract, she signed her death warrant. Ultimately, the court found that Raffel had suffocated Catherine with a pillow while she slept. With the help of Anna and Tadev, her body was placed in her car, driven to a remote area, and set on fire. Raffel and Anna were sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 32 years before parole eligibility. Tadev received 27 years in the aftermath. Philip and Jane Wellsberg became vocal critics of the UK's immigration policies. They argued that stricter entry laws similar to those in the US might have prevented Raffel, a man with a previous assault conviction in Poland, from entering the UK. Jane believes the system failed her daughter by not thoroughly checking Raffel's background. Catherine was remembered as a brilliant, driven young woman, a first-class economics graduate from Bath Spa University, with a promising career and future ahead. Her family now struggles to imagine a world without her. Welcome back, detectives. As we close one tragic chapter, let's open another. This is the disturbing case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. He came from a stable family and went on to attend North Carolina State University in Raleigh. After college, he became a successful salesman at a major retail chain. While Jason thrived professionally, his personal life told a different story. Friends described him as charming but volatile, particularly in his relationships with women. He had a reputation as a womanizer, constantly cycling through partners. Michelle Young, on the other hand, was born in February 1977 in New York, raised alongside her younger sister Meredith by their devoted mother. Linda Michelle stood out early on. She was intelligent, passionate, and ambitious, with dreams of pursuing a career in economics and law. Her academic excellence led her to a top university in North Carolina, where she would go on to earn her master's degree in economics. It was on her birthday that Michelle met Jason. He accidentally spilled a drink on her at a bar. Apologetic, he offered to replace it, and what began as small talk quickly blossomed into romance. Though the two lived in different cities, they began a relationship, seeing each other during weekends and business trips. Then came unexpected news. Michelle was pregnant. Neither of them was ready for parenthood, but Michelle decided to keep the baby. After a month of contemplation, Jason relocated to be near her, and the two married, not for love, but practicality. Michelle needed health insurance, and the cost of childbirth was too steep to manage alone. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in 2004. Michelle embraced motherhood fully, supported by her mother and sister. But Linda, Michelle's mother, sensed tension in the household. Jason had a temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to hide the truth, but privately, she admitted their relationship was strained. When Cassidy turned 2, Michelle became pregnant again. Nervous, she eventually shared the news with Jason, who surprisingly took it well. They traveled to Jason's parents' home in Brevard to celebrate with family. On the way back, the couple went out to dinner, leaving Cassidy with her grandparents. During the drive home, Jason lost control of the vehicle, veering off the road and into a ravine. Both were injured, but not severely. Tragically, Michelle suffered a miscarriage. Oddly, Jason remained calm through the ordeal. Earlier that year, Jason had reconnected with a woman from college, coincidentally also named Michelle. He even mentioned it to his wife. But what started as innocent communication would later take on darker implications. Michelle Money was invited to visit the home of her close friends, Jason and his pregnant wife. During her stay, Michelle began confiding in them mostly about her troubled family life. At the same time, she repeatedly complimented Jason, telling his wife how lucky she was to be expecting his child. Jason's wife wasn't concerned. She saw Michelle as a friend in need and genuinely wanted to comfort her. But what she didn't know was that Jason and Michelle were growing closer behind her back. They began calling each other daily and started meeting in secret. Jason often explained his absences by claiming he was away on business. His wife suspected nothing. Things took a drastic turn in the summer of 2006, when Michelle discovered she was pregnant. But unlike before, Jason's reaction was cold and distant. Michelle assumed his indifference was due to her previous miscarriage. She had no idea what was really going on. By November, 5 months into her pregnancy, Jason left for what he claimed was a 300-mile business trip. That same night, Michelle had a long emotional phone call with her best friend. She vented about her crumbling marriage and a heated argument she'd had with Jason. After the call, her husband left home. Jason checked into a hotel that night, citing travel exhaustion. But instead of resting, he walked the premises, carefully examining entrances, exits, and surveillance cameras looking for blind spots. He was plotting a way to leave and return undetected, crafting what he believed would be the perfect alibi. Early the next morning, Jason called his sister Runel Meredith. He claimed he'd mistakenly sent a jewelry order confirmation to his home fax machine and worried Michelle might see it and ruin a surprise anniversary gift. Although Meredith disliked Jason, she agreed to help. She entered the house using a secret garage door only known to family. Inside, it was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and papers were still near the entrance, clear signs she hadn't left. Upstairs, Meredith discovered a horrific scene. Michelle was lying on the floor next to her bed, lifeless. Her skull was fractured. Blood covered the walls, floor, and furniture. A trail of bloody footprints surrounded her body. As Meredith called 911, she heard a sound from under the bed. Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy. The little girl was unharmed, but had witnessed everything. She had spent hours beside her mother's body, waiting in silence. A forensic examination later revealed that Michelle had suffered a brutal beating. Her teeth had been broken. Her skull was fractured with a heavy object. A blood-stained pillow suggested she had also been suffocated. Investigators quickly noted that nothing had been stolen. This wasn't a robbery. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever did this had a key or knew about the family's secret entrance. While Jason would have been the prime suspect, he appeared to have a solid alibi. Hotel records showed he checked in and used his keycard multiple times. But something didn't add up. A hotel employee reported finding the fire escape propped open with a rock. Surveillance footage showed that the hotel's cameras had been tampered with that night. Jason's keycard had last been used only 30 minutes after check-in, then nothing. Later that night, a man resembling Jason was spotted at a gas station near the crime scene. He refused to show ID, paid in cash, and left quickly without even waiting for his change. The attendant later identified him as Jason, but Jason denied being there. On the day of the murder, Jason made over 20 short calls to Michelle and 5 to his mistress, all under 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a panic. Cell tower data confirmed he was not in his hotel room when he claimed to be. He also showed up late and distracted to his business meeting the next day. Despite these red flags, there wasn't enough hard evidence to charge him. Jason continued living freely for nearly 3 years and even gained custody of Cassidy, much to Michelle's family's devastation. But in 2012, the case was reopened. New witnesses came forward. One reported seeing Jason's distinctive white car parked near the house that night. A child psychologist testified that Cassidy had reenacted a violent scene involving a doll and a man, likely her father. Michelle Money, now his former mistress, revealed Jason's explosive temper and controlling behavior. She admitted that he had once confessed to feeling trapped in his marriage. This was enough. Jason was arrested, tried, and found guilty of the brutal murder of his pregnant wife. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their daughter Cassidy, who witnessed her mother's death and whose father now sits behind bars, was placed in the care of her maternal grandparents and aunt. A child once surrounded by love was left without either parental because of one man's monstrous betrayal. Georgina Simon's and Peter Morgan exclusivity. In Georgina Simon's relationship with Pete remained elusive. While romantically involved with him, she continued to see other clients. Unlike Peter Morgan, who had previously accepted this arrangement, Pete struggled with Georgina's ongoing involvement with other men. Though they weren't officially exclusive, Pete grew increasingly resentful. By 2015, Peter Morgan persuaded Georgina to work solely as his personal escort. He agreed to pay her a monthly allowance ranging between $7,000 and $10,000. During this time, Peter was overseeing major renovations at his historic Grade II listed estate, including a cottage known as Castle Bungalow, located on the grounds. As part of their arrangement, Georgina moved into the cottage. Their relationship evolved. Peter began confiding in Georgina about his personal struggles and future aspirations. Eventually, he made a life-altering decision in his 22-year marriage to his wife Helen. He ensured Helen would be financially secure, while Georgina remained in the cottage. But the fallout was immense. Pete, Georgina's former partner and father of her child, was left heartbroken. He felt as if he had lost the woman he loved forever. In August 2015, Georgina and Pete traveled together to Africa, but Pete returned with a sense of dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that Georgina was slipping away from him, especially to someone as wealthy and influential as Peter Morgan. The comparison left Pete feeling helpless. consumed by jealousy and despair. Even though he earned enough to build a decent life for them, he sensed he could never compete with Peter's wealth or the lifestyle he offered Georgina. Pete's mother, Lynn, later reflected on her son's mental state, saying, "He was happy to be with her, but he put up with a lot. I didn't know what else was going on, but Peter Morgan was constantly on his mind." Pete never spoke openly about his turmoil, not even to his mother. But on November 15th, 2015, after a heated argument with Georgina about suspicious text messages, Pete went missing. 2 days later, he was found dead, having taken his own life in a wooded area. The loss was devastating. Alex Butcher, a friend of Georgina, would later summarize the situation bluntly. Rich Pete adored her. He truly loved Georgina and saw a future together. But she was only ever interested in him for his money. Even when she claimed to have left poor Pete for him, her real plan was to drain rich Pete and go back. To make matters worse, Georgina had also lost her father to suicide just months earlier. Despite the chaos, she had cared deeply for Pete, as many did. But now she was forced to confront a cruel reality. Her actions may have played a part in Pete's tragic end. Pete's death had a profound effect on Georgina. She spiraled. Her behavior changed dramatically, and she grew increasingly critical of Peter Morgan, blaming him for Pete's death. She also resented him for getting social services involved in matters concerning her daughter. Tensions escalated when Georgina publicly lashed out at Peter in front of his friends and family. Peter was furious, even with Pete out of the picture. Georgina still didn't belong to him entirely. He later claimed that Georgina attempted suicide, describing how he once found her submerged in the bath with slashed wrists and had to pull her out. In the aftermath of Pete's death, Georgina turned to drugs and alcohol. She held Peter accountable, insisting it was all his fault. Their toxic relationship continued to spiral, especially after Pete's funeral in December 2015. That's when Georgina began seeing Tom Bollinger, a close friend of Pete's. Enraged and increasingly paranoid, Peter began monitoring her every move. He took her phone to read her texts and even planted a covert listening device inside the cottage, a white plug adapter that allowed him to eavesdrop on all her conversations. In total, Peter made over 500 calls to the bug, obsessively listening. And one night in January 2016, Peter overheard a conversation that shattered him. Georgina was speaking to Tom Ballinger and confessed she planned to blackmail Peter into signing over the cottage. She also revealed her intent to move to London and resume escorting high-paying upscale clients. Peter's heart sank. He had suspected she wasn't truly committed, but now he had confirmation. Georgina made it clear she could destroy him. She threatened to expose damning secrets, that he had hidden $50,000 in cash to evade taxes, and that his construction projects violated safety regulations. She claimed to possess intimate photos and videos evidence of group sex sessions and encounters in Peter's own marital bed. She knew he had engaged sex workers while still married, and she had blackmailed at least 3 former clients before. Peter realized the depth of the threat she posed. She could ruin him personally, professionally, and financially. Consumed by fear and desperation, he began considering the unthinkable. He meticulously plotted her murder. On his iPhone's Notes app, Peter drafted a chilling list of supplies and steps to carry out the crime. On January 12, 2016, Georgina's friend Alex contacted Welsh police. Georgina had failed to pick up her daughter from school. She and Alex had made plans for a play date, but Georgina never showed up. When police arrived at the cottage, they found Peter there alongside Georgina's mother and Alex. Peter told officers that Georgina had been in a fragile state, struggling with grief and substance abuse. He suggested she may have gone into the nearby woods to harm herself. Despite an immediate search, Georgina was nowhere to be found. Due to her mental health history, police classified Georgina as a high-risk missing person. Soon Peter admitted to taking her phone claiming he believed she was using it to set up a drug deal. Friends and family told police that Peter was obsessively in love with Georgina, but she viewed their relationship as nothing more than a financial arrangement. Alex later revealed that Georgina had made up her mind she was leaving Peter Morgan for good and was ready to start over, but she never got the chance. Part 1. The Murder of Georgina Simons. Peter was brought in for questioning after police managed to track down Georgina Simons' missing phone, following a prolonged interrogation. He eventually confessed, admitting that he had strangled Georgina and buried her body on his property. When officers searched the area, they made a horrifying discovery. Georgina's remains were found concealed beneath heavy farm machinery. Her body was bound with rope, and an orange string was tied tightly around her neck rim, evidence that she had been strangled to death. Nearby, investigators uncovered more damning clues. Georgina's handbag, car keys, house keys, and high heels had been thrown away in a rubbish bin. Also discovered was a covert listening device Peter had installed in the home. He claimed it was to protect Georgina, but call logs revealed he had used the device 54 times between 2015 and 2016 when questioned. Peter insisted he bought the listening device because he believed Georgina was taking advantage of him. He claimed he had overheard her planning to blackmail him into giving up ownership of the cottage, but the evidence painted a different story. Police recovered a chilling shopping list saved in Peter's phone. Items included a poly tarp, snips, rope, gloves, tape, a plug, and a large bag. These were later identified as tools used in Georgina's murder. Even more incriminating was the farm's own security footage. It showed Peter arriving in his vehicle, leaving, and concealing Georgina's body. Authorities believed Peter was unaware that his wife had recently installed the security cameras. On January 14, 2016, Peter was formally charged with murder. His trial began on November 28 that same year. He pled not guilty. The prosecution argued that Peter had developed an unhealthy obsession with Georgina, obsession that eventually escalated into a meticulously planned murder. His defense, on the other hand, claimed that Peter's Asperger's syndrome impaired his understanding of the consequences of his actions. 2 doctors supported this claim, but the prosecution's medical expert strongly disagreed. In the end, the jury sided with the prosecution. Peter was found guilty of murder on December 21st. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He later appealed the conviction in October 2017, but the appeal was dismissed in March 2018. The tragic and senseless death of Georgina Simons sent shockwaves through her community. Family and friends were left devastated, mourning a woman whose vibrant personality had touched many lives. In the wake of her death, the community rallied behind her loved ones, offering support and solidarity. Though her life was stolen too soon, Georgina's memory endures as a reminder of both the fragility of life and the strength of those left behind. Part 2. The Killing of Tom Nevin. Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're examining another chilling case, one that shocked Ireland to its core. On March 19, 1996, 55-year-old publican Tom Nevin was fatally shot in his pub, Jack White's Inn, located near Britas Bay. It happened in the early hours of the morning, as Tom was counting the weekend takings from St. Patrick's Day. He was killed by a single shotgun blast to the side. His car, used as the getaway vehicle, was later found abandoned in Dublin's Dartmouth Square. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong, but as the investigation progressed, the truth turned out to be far darker. On the day she was arrested, Catherine Nevin, Tom's widow, was visiting Dublin when she was taken into custody by investigators. She was charged with the murder of her husband and with soliciting others to kill him as early as 1989 and 1990. Catherine Mary Nevin, née Scully, was born on October 1, 1950, in the quiet village of Newry, County Kildare. She grew up in a modest 2-bedroom home with her brother and sister. Catherine attended Presentation College, an all-girls school run by nuns, and was known as a bright, determined student. After leaving school, she took up sewing, teaching classes around the country before branching into beauty and presentation training. Her talent and drive were undeniable. Those around her saw a woman destined for business success. Her first major job was as a receptionist at Dublin's oldest hotel, the Castle Hotel. Colleagues described her as glamorous, efficient, and ambitious. At just 21, she dreamed of opening her own modeling agency. It was at the Castle Hotel that she met Tom Nevin, a reserved, down-to-earth man 10 years her senior. They married in Rome in 1976. Tom, originally from the village of Tina in County Galway, was the eldest of 9 siblings. He loved hurling and was managing his uncle's pub in Dolphin's Barn when he met Catherine. Together, the couple became involved in property and pub management across Dublin. Catherine had a sharp eye for interior design and took charge of collecting rent in 1986. They purchased Jack White's pub and restaurant in Britas Bay. The location was ideal, a popular beach destination just outside Dublin. Business thrived, but behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Catherine, by many accounts, was a domineering and verbally abusive woman. She regularly berated staff and belittled Tom in public. While some employees initially saw her as a strict but caring figure, most later described her as a nightmare to work for. One former employee recalled a petty moment when she confiscated the staff tip jar simply because she didn't like the jovial atmosphere after hours. In contrast, Tom Nevin was beloved. At 6'3", he was affectionately known as Daddy by his team, gentle, kind, and always willing to lend a hand. He ran the pub with warmth and dignity, while Catherine ruled with an iron fist. The deterioration of their marriage, paired with Catherine's growing bitterness and control, set the stage for tragedy. The murder investigation revealed that Catherine had tried multiple times over the years to have her husband killed. It wasn't until 1996 that her plan finally succeeded under the guise of a robbery. When the full extent of her plot was exposed, Ireland was stunned. Catherine Nevin was ultimately convicted of her husband's murder and sentenced to life in prison. The woman who had once been seen as a model of ambition had orchestrated the cold-blooded killing of the man who had loved and trusted her. Kathleen, one of the cleaning staff, was instructed to come in early and redo rooms she had already cleaned. When Catherine asked her to work full-time and Kathleen declined, Catherine retaliated, contacting social welfare authorities and falsely reporting that Kathleen had refused full-time employment, making her ineligible for government assistance. It was a petty and vindictive move. By 1986, Catherine and her husband Tom were no longer living as a married couple. Tom slept in the staff quarters, while Catherine occupied the main bedroom and openly entertained other men just doors away from Tom's room. It was a deeply humiliating situation for him. Catherine had requested a divorce multiple times, but Tom refused. He had already annulled his first marriage, and his Catholic upbringing made him reluctant to endure another failed union. Ironically, if he had agreed to the divorce, Tom might still be alive, spared years of public humiliation at the hands of his wife. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine made no fewer than 18 attempts to have Tom killed. She stood to gain significantly from his death. Ownership of Jack White's pub, then valued at £67,000 Irish pounds, 2 Dublin properties worth £1 million, a £78,000 life insurance payout, and £197,000 in cash. The motive was both financial and personal. Catherine wasn't just manipulative, she was what some might call, in Irish slang, a bit of a gore. She had numerous affairs, gravitated toward men in high-profile positions, and wasn't shy about using her sexuality. At Jack White's pub, if someone important came through the door, Catherine was quick to fawn over them, decked out in short skirts, low-cut tops, and high heels. On Tuesday, March 19, 1996. Catherine and Tom were set to celebrate 10 years of owning the pub. It was just after Patty's weekend, and the pub had been busy. That evening, while Catherine was supposedly asleep upstairs, Tom remained downstairs in the kitchen counting the weekend's earnings. According to Catherine, she was awakened by someone pushing her face into a pillow while shouting jewelry and threatening her with a knife. She claimed the intruder tied her up, and after a while, she heard 2 vehicles speeding off. Eventually, she reached a panic button, and guard eye arrived at around 4:30 a.m. They found Tom slumped on the kitchen floor, dead from a gunshot to the chest. He was still wearing his glasses, with a pen in hand, appearing to have been interrupted mid-test. Around £13,000 was stolen, and Tom's car was found later, abandoned in Dublin City. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong, but inconsistencies in Catherine's story quickly emerged. There were no signs of forced entry. The phone lines hadn't been cut, just taken off the hook. Her bedroom appeared ransacked, yet nothing valuable was missing. Jewelry was scattered, but not stolen. Most notably, it took Catherine 2 hours to press the panic button after the shooting, and she never went to Tom's room for help after freeing herself. When guard eye arrived, she was scantily clad and claimed to have been tied with her own tights and gagged with her underwear. A fingerprint expert later noted that drawers in the bedroom had clearly been removed and placed gently on the floor, rather than hastily pulled out, as in a typical burglary. And though staff often stayed the night after a busy bank holiday, Catherine had told them they weren't welcome to do so that evening. A curious instruction, given what was to happen. Despite the many suspicious details, investigators lacked direct evidence, no forensics, no eyewitnesses, and no confession. Still, guard eye were confident they had their suspect. While they worked to build a case, Catherine played the grieving widow to perfection, dressed in black, holding a single red rose at the funeral, and basking in the sympathy of friends, family, and customers. She even had a massive headstone installed at Tom's grave, inscribed with poetic tributes. She placed a public advertisement in a local newspaper professing her devotion to Tom. It wasn't until April 1997, after she had sold the pub for £500,000, that Catherine was arrested and charged with murder and solicitation to murder. By then, she had become one of Ireland's most recognized and talked about women. Tom's family petitioned the courts to freeze her assets pending trial. The first trial in 2000 collapsed after it was discovered that the jury's deliberations had been overheard. The second trial was delayed when Catherine was hospitalized, though proceedings resumed shortly after. She pleaded not guilty. With no physical evidence, the prosecution leaned heavily on the testimony of 3 men Catherine had approached over the years, asking them to kill Tom. The first was William McLean, a known smuggler from County Monaghan, and a former barman at Jack White's. He was also Catherine's first known extramarital partner. Years later, she called him, claiming to be recovering from a heart attack, though in reality, she was having cosmetic surgery. She offered him £20,000 and a rekindled relationship if he agreed to murder Tom. He refused. The second was John Jones, a former Sinn Féin member who ran an advice clinic in Dublin. Catherine offered to host political meetings at the pub to curry favor with the IRA. Then she asked Jones if he could arrange for them to kill Tom. He thought she was joking, till she came back a second time. She even showed up with visible bruises, claiming Tom had assaulted her. In fact, she'd had more cosmetic work done. Jones turned her down again. The third man was Jerry Heaps, a former provisional IRA member introduced to Catherine through Jones. She approached him on at least 10 occasions, proposing different scenarios to have Tom killed, like ambushing him during property rounds when he was carrying pub takings. When Jerry pointed out that she might get shot too, she reportedly said, "It would look great if Tom died in my arms." Jerry refused each time. Catherine also reportedly had an affair with Garda Inspector Tom Kennedy, though he denied it in court. Staff at the pub testified, seeing them in bed together. Kennedy insisted he visited only as a friend to Tom, but Tom confided in staff that he suspected otherwise. After Kennedy's retirement party hosted at the pub, Catherine gifted him flights to New York to visit his children, raising more eyebrows. When later questioned, Kennedy dismissed the idea of romance, saying Catherine was the kind of woman who could give you a pain in the head, and that, at over 60, sex wasn't on his radar. Then there was Judge Dano Buckler, introduced to Catherine by Kennedy. He too was said to have had an affair with her, something he also denied. Yet it was revealed that Buckler had his own key to the pub. Tom Nevin had always been a man of routine and discipline until that routine was fatally disrupted. For weeks, staff at his pub noticed something strange. A man was letting himself in and out of the building at all hours of the night. According to employees, this deeply upset Tom, especially when rumors of his wife Catherine's alleged affair began to swirl. Staff members claimed arguments between Tom and Catherine were becoming more frequent. Still, when later questioned in court, Catherine flatly denied any extramarital relationships. Then came Monday, March 18th, a seemingly normal day. The bar and lounge experienced its usual flow of customers. But there was one unusual detail that would later haunt investigators. A mysterious man wearing a long overcoat, carrying a bag, entered the pub. He made a brief phone call, muttering under his breath. He then spoke to Tom. Observers assumed Tom knew the man based on the casual nature of their conversation. But what's chilling is that no one remembers seeing this man leave the premises. Some theorize he never did. Instead, he may have hidden somewhere inside waiting for nightfall, waiting to kill after Tom's murder. Suspicion naturally turned toward Catherine, but despite being under active investigation, she faced no opposition when applying for sole ownership of the pub's license. Judge Danica Abola granted it to her privately, in chambers. Another theory soon emerged, that Catherine herself pulled the trigger. She had been the only person in the pub at the time. When guards discovered Tom's body, he still had his glasses on and a pen in his hand, and he hadn't even flinched. If Catherine had entered the kitchen, he likely wouldn't have seen her as a threat. Tests revealed no firearm residue on Catherine's clothes, but investigators had only tested the outfit she wore when police arrived. She had over 2 hours, alone in the building, plenty of time to change clothes, clean up, and stage the scene. She even admitted to washing her hands before the police got there, in another version of events. Catherine may have had an accomplice, someone who not only tied her up, but also took off with the murder weapon, the cash, and the car to Dublin. Yet another theory suggests Catherine herself helped plan the murder with others, orchestrating the entire act from the shadows. As media coverage intensified, the press dubbed her the Black Widow. Her trial quickly became one of the most sensational in Irish history. Catherine tried to deflect blame by painting Tom as abusive and alcoholic, but her courtroom image, a carefully curated blend of glamour and control, betrayed her. Despite her elegant grooming, the tight-lipped expressions and firm jaw suggested a woman calculating every move. So intense was the media's obsession with her appearance that Judge Carl eventually banned any reporting on her clothes, makeup, or nail polish during the trial. After a riveting 42-day courtroom battle, the jury's 6 men and 6 women deliberated for 5 long days. In April 2000, they returned with a verdict: guilty. Catherine was convicted of soliciting 3 different men to murder her husband and for ultimately arranging the hit that ended his life. She was sentenced to life in prison, but Catherine wasn't finished yet. 3 years later, she returned to court, hoping to overturn her conviction. The Court of Criminal Appeal dismissed her claim, finding no new evidence that could help her case. In 2010, she filed for a miscarriage of justice, again denied, and in 2014, her appeal to the Supreme Court was rejected. Tom had never written a will, The couple had no children. That meant Catherine stood to inherit everything. But Tom's mother had already moved to freeze the estate, especially proceeds from the pub. When Catherine was finally convicted, she lost all rights to the inheritance. Tom's mother had also begun legal proceedings to have Catherine disinherited before she passed away. Her children, Patrick and Margaret, took up the case after her death. The Supreme Court ruled in their favor. Catherine Nevin would get nothing. In September 2016, Catherine was hospitalized. She was later diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. She spent 3 days in the hospital before being granted a temporary RELEASE, known as RTR, for treatment. She was moved to an acute post-care unit on November 7, 2016, where she remained until August 2017. Following another temporary release for prior socialization, she was moved to supportive housing, but her health continued to deteriorate. In November 2017, she was re-hospitalized. By December, she was transferred to a hospice, where she spent her final days. Catherine Nevin died in February 2018. She was 67 years old. Despite her conviction by a jury and the mountain of evidence against her, she maintained her innocence to the very end. She never revealed the identity of the person or people who helped her take Tom's life. Now let's turn to another heartbreaking story. The case of Georgia Williams. A life stolen far too soon. Shropshire, England was shaken to its core by the devastating murder of a vibrant, kind-hearted teenager, Georgia Williams. Born on September 17, 1995, in Telford, Georgia, grew up in a loving, close-knit household with her parents, Lynette and Steve, and her older sister, Scarlett. Her early years were marked by compassion and a quiet strength, always the first to help and the last to judge. Georgia brought light into any room she entered, but it was this very kindness, her deep desire to help others, that made her vulnerable. Though she struggled with bullying in middle school, Georgia's high school years saw a transformation. She found her confidence, gained loyal friends, and quickly became one of the most admired students at her school. Her leadership qualities led her to be named head girl, a position of honor and respect. Outside academics, Georgia's dreams were rooted in service. She trained with the Air Cadets, envisioning a future as a paramedic in the Royal Air Force. At 17, Georgia started working at a local petrol station. That's where she met Jamie Reynolds, a 22-year-old co-worker known for his quiet demeanor and emotional distance. While others at work kept their distance, Georgia did the opposite. She extended him friendship, determined to lift his spirits and help him feel included. Moved by her kindness, Jamie began to open up. He participated in social events and gradually blended into the group, but over time, his gratitude turned into obsession. Georgia, ever compassionate, had no idea how deeply Jamie had misinterpreted her kindness. Jamie started to believe Georgia was more than just a friend. Encouraged by this dangerous delusion, he eventually built up the courage to confess his feelings. What happened next would change everything. Jamie Reynolds had made his feelings for Georgia Williams clear. He expressed a desire to be more than friends, even imagining himself as her boyfriend. But Georgia, while kind, gently turned him down. She told Jamie she didn't share the same romantic feelings and was committed to preserving the friendship they already had. Although he appeared to accept her response, beneath the surface, something darker had begun to stir. Georgia and Jamie both worked at a local petrol station, and during one of their shifts together, Jamie opened up to her. He shared his dissatisfaction with his job and confided that he wanted to pursue something more meaningful, perhaps a career in line with his true passions. Curious and eager to help, Georgia asked what interested him. That's when Jamie spoke about his love for photography. Seeing an opportunity to support her friend, Georgia encouraged him to explore it seriously. Jamie asked if she would model for his portfolio. Honoring their friendship, Georgia agreed, and a photo shoot was scheduled for Sunday, May 26, 2013, at Jamie's parents' home. That Sunday, Georgia's family had plans to a barbecue, with her grandparents visiting. She considered canceling, torn between obligations. But she didn't want to let Jamie down, especially after committing to help him. Assuring her parents she'd only be gone a short while, Jamie's house was just 5 minutes away. Georgia got ready, doing her hair and makeup, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. At 7:30 p.m., just before she left, her father remarked how beautiful she looked, comparing her to Sandy from Greece. As night fell and Georgia didn't return, her mother grew slightly concerned. She assumed Georgia had lost track of time, caught up in the shoot, or chatting with friends. A text message from Georgia's phone claimed the photo shoot had ended and that she was now with friends, adding the usual kiss face emojis she always used. But when morning came and Georgia still hadn't returned home, concern turned to alarm. At 6:30 a.m., her mother texted again, asking why she hadn't come back. An hour later, another message arrived from Georgia's phone, saying she'd stayed at a friend's place and her phone was about to die. What her parents didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Georgia hadn't sent those messages. Someone else had, and Georgia wasn't coming home the following day. Georgia was supposed to attend a music festival and had also scheduled her very first driving lesson, something she'd been looking forward to, but she never showed up. By now, her family was desperate. They contacted friends, relatives, anyone who might have seen her. No one had. With no other option, her parents reported her missing to police. The only clue they had was that Georgia had gone to Jamie Reynolds' house for the photo shoot. That was it. Police quickly turned their attention to Jamie. What they found in his history was chilling. In 2008, Jamie had attempted to strangle a teenage girl. Despite the severity of the attack, he was only issued a warning. The incident had been buried until now. Investigators were alarmed. Jamie instantly became the prime suspect. When officers arrived at his home, there was no answer. They forced entry and searched the house, but Jamie was gone. Georgia was nowhere to be found. The manhunt began. Police traced Jamie's van through a tip from his parents, who were away on vacation. An alert was issued nationwide. It didn't take long. Jamie was found in Glasgow, Scotland, 200 miles away, staying in a modest hotel. He was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping, but Jamie wasn't talking. He offered no information about Georgia's whereabouts and was soon transported back to Shropshire for further questioning. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Police searched Jamie's home again, this time with a forensic team. Inside, they found a camera and an SD card, but the files had been wiped. The camera was sent to a digital forensics lab, where experts worked tirelessly to recover the deleted images. What they found shattered Georgia's family and confirmed investigators' worst fears. The recovered photos showed Georgia during the photo shoot, posing as expected, smiling, unaware of what was to come. She looked comfortable, trusting, but the images grew more disturbing. Jamie had used the camera to document every step of what he did. The final moments of Georgia's life had been captured by the very person she had once considered a friend. Jamie Reynolds harbored a dark and twisted obsession, one that would ultimately cost a young woman her life. His fixation with violent, sadistic pornography escalated into a real-life horror, culminating in a grotesque display of power over Georgia Williams during her final moments. In court, Reynolds bowed his head in shame as the harrowing details of Georgia's final hours were read aloud. Her grief-stricken parents and sisters sat just feet away, forced to relive the unimaginable. The courtroom was heavy with tension as the jury viewed the graphic images Jamie had taken of documenting her suffering in real time. Overcome with anguish, Georgia's family fled the courtroom, unable to endure the cruelty of what had been done to her. In 2014, Jamie Reynolds attempted to appeal his whole life sentence, but the court denied him. The following year, a serious case review was released. It sharply criticized the actions of police, children's services, and mental health professionals for their collective failure to intervene years earlier. The review revealed a disturbing truth. 5 years before George's murder, Reynolds had attempted to strangle another teenage girl in his home. The warning signs were there. Authorities had a chance to act, but nothing was done. George's parents responded to the report with profound sorrow. They expressed anger and heartbreak at the missed opportunities that could have saved their daughter. Outside the courtroom, George's father, Steve Williams, spoke to the press. He mourned the loss of his daughter's future and emphasized a cruel irony. No matter how long Jamie Reynolds remained behind bars, he would still wake up each day with the one gift he had stolen from Georgia life. Reynolds remains in prison to this day. Georgia's mother, Lynette Williams, later chronicled their family's grief in her memoir, Our Georgia. The book recounts the pain of losing a daughter, the devastation of betrayal, and the deep failures of a system that allowed a predator to remain free. Described as both powerful and deeply moving, the book is a tribute to Georgia's a searing indictment of the missed chances that cost her everything. Georgia's death left a gaping wound in the hearts of those who loved her. Her absence is a chilling reminder of how fleeting life can be and how vital it is to protect the vulnerable. In the aftermath, the community rallied together, offering strength and support to her shattered family as they faced their darkest days. Amy Widener case begins. Amy Widener's story begins with early responsibility and ends in unthinkable tragedy. Amy became a mother at just 14 years old, a major life change for any teenager, and especially for her mother, Gloria. Despite the shock and emotional toll, Gloria chose to stand by her daughter. What she didn't know was that the challenges of teenage pregnancy would pale in comparison to the heartaches still to come. Born in 1973, Amy was part of a family in Indianapolis. Her older brother John Paul was just a year older, while her younger sisters, Nia and Cassie, were 1 and 4 years younger. Gloria, a single mother, raised all 4 children on her own after a divorce from their father, who had long since disappeared from their lives. Amy took on a leadership role in the home. She helped with cooking, cleaning, and caring for her sisters. She was known for her cheerful personality, bright smile, and dreams of becoming a teacher. But at 14, her world changed. Amy discovered she was pregnant by Tony Abo, a 20-year-old man and friend of her brother's. Their relationship had been kept secret, and the pregnancy, hidden under baggy clothes, went unnoticed for nearly 6 months. Eventually, unable to hide it any longer, Amy broke down and told her mother, "I was stunned. I just couldn't believe it," Gloria later recalled. "At the time, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen in my life." But Gloria embraced her daughter and vowed to support her. She insisted Amy cut off all contact with Tony, and the family moved forward. On October 25, 1987, Amy gave birth to her daughter, Emily. Just 6 days later, Amy was back in school, balancing motherhood and education with a level of maturity far beyond her years. Gloria, recognizing Amy's determination, often helped care for Emily so her daughter could continue her studies. The family adjusted. Life slowly began to stabilize, but everything changed again on the morning of November 13, 1989. Amy, now 16, woke up with a sore throat and decided to stay home from school with 2-year-old Emily. When Gloria offered to drop Emily off at the nanny's, Amy declined. She wanted to keep her daughter with her after breakfast. The rest of the family left for the day. Gloria went to work. Amy's siblings headed to school. For hours, no one heard from Amy. At 9:30 a.m., Gloria called the house. No answer. She tried again later. Still nothing. Worried, she called a neighbor and asked them to check in. The neighbor reported an unsettling silence. Overcome with dread, Gloria left work and rushed home. She found Emily sitting alone on the staircase when Amy didn't respond to her calls. Gloria climbed the stairs and found a scene that would haunt her forever. Amy lay lifeless on her bed, unclothed, surrounded by blood. In that moment, Gloria's world shattered. The perpetrator may have gained entry through an unlocked back door, perhaps was let in by Amy herself through the front. Inside Amy's room, investigators uncovered chilling evidence, a bloody palm print on the bed linens and wall, along with several strands of body and head hair, believed to have come from the attacker. The medical examiner concluded that Amy Widener had suffered a blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by a sharp object. She had been sexually assaulted and ultimately strangled. What made this already horrific crime even more haunting was the presence of Amy's 2-year-old daughter, Emily. Authorities feared the little girl may have witnessed the entire attack. Miraculously, she was found physically unharmed. Despite her tender age, police hoped Emily might be able to offer some clues. To communicate with her, investigators used finger puppets and created a gentle, child-friendly environment. During one of these sessions, as she moved energetically around the room, Emily shared a single, striking comment: "Mommy was really mad." As part of the evidence collection process, the section of the wall bearing the bloody palm print was removed entirely. Investigators also collected Amy's clothes and bed linens, hoping they might yield forensic leads in their pursuit of justice. Detectives began questioning Amy's family, friends, and neighbors. Her 17-year-old brother, John Paul, revealed that investigators initially considered him a suspect. However, he had a solid alibi, and no evidence tied him to the crime. Tony Eyre, Amy's ex-boyfriend and Emily's father, was also interrogated. He spoke of Amy with affection and denied any ill will toward her. His alibi for the day of the murder was verified. Another person of interest was Troy Jackson, a neighbor who appeared to have knowledge about the stereo system stolen from the Widener home the day Amy was killed, though he denied involvement and had no visible scratches or bruises. Police collected his hair samples. The results showed no match to the evidence at the scene, and after passing a polygraph test, suspicions against him were dropped. Beyond these individuals, authorities interviewed several others' neighbors, classmates, and acquaintances. Fingerprints and hair samples were gathered from each one, yet none stood out as suspects. Amy Widener's funeral was held shortly after the murder. A large crowd gathered to mourn the loss of a young life taken too soon. Detectives quietly observed attendees, hoping someone's behavior might raise a red flag. One particularly heartbreaking moment was the display of Amy's favorite photo, her wearing a white turtleneck vest adorned with a floral pattern. It was in this very outfit that Amy was laid to rest. As the days turned into weeks and months, no arrests were made. The Widener family clung desperately to the hope that justice would one day come. Following Amy's death, her mother, Gloria Widener, officially adopted Emily and resumed the role of motherhood. But the burden of grief and fear was heavy. With the killer still on the loose, Gloria never left her daughters alone and lived under constant anxiety. She even considered moving to another home for their safety, though financial limitations kept them rooted in place. The tragedy also sent shockwaves through Amy's circle of friends. Many became terrified that they, too, could become targets. Some pleaded with their parents to board up the windows, taking desperate, fearful steps to avoid a similar fate. One day Gloria returned home, expecting her daughters to be back from school. The house was eerily quiet. Their shoes were by the door, but no sound echoed from within. Heart pounding, Gloria climbed the stairs, each step filled with dread. When she reached the bedroom, she braced herself only to find, with immense relief, that the girls had simply fallen asleep. As Emily grew older, she was spared the memories of that night. She had no recollection of speaking to the police or learning of her mother's death. But for Gloria, the trauma remained ever present. Periodically, detectives would revisit the case, reopening wounds with each conversation. Eventually, Gloria asked them to stop. She no longer wanted to relive that night. Her only wish was peace, something Amy never got. Financial limitations left the Widener family with little choice but to remain in the same home, a constant, painful reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded there. Fear rippled through the community, especially among Amy's close friends, terrified they might become the next target. Some begged their parents to take drastic security measures, even going so far as to board up windows with wooden planks. One afternoon, Gloria Widener returned home, expecting to find her younger daughters back from school. But as she stepped through the door, she was met with an eerie silence. The house felt hollow, too quiet. Their outdoor shoes were neatly placed near the entry, but no voices called out to her. A chill crept through her as her thoughts spiraled toward the worst. Each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last, her anxiety growing with every footfall. At the threshold of their bedroom, Gloria paused, bracing herself for another unimaginable discovery. But when she opened the door, she found them safe, simply napping, peacefully unaware of the fear that had gripped their mother as years passed. Amy's daughter Emily grew up with no memory of the night that changed everything. She recalled nothing of the police interviews or the moment she was told her mother was gone. For her, the pain was a silent inheritance, something she carried without knowing. But for Gloria, the trauma was impossible to forget. Detectives would occasionally return, reopening the investigation, digging through the past in search of justice. Each visit forced the family to relive that horrific day. Eventually, Gloria reached her limit. She told them, gently but firmly, that she needed peace. No amount of questioning would bring Amy back. Then, in 2002, 13 years after, Amy's murder, an unexpected call, jolted the case back into motion. A 29-year-old man phoned the Indianapolis Police Department, claiming he had experienced a dream in which Amy Widener had appeared to him, revealing details of her death. While the caller provided some specifics about the crime, investigators quickly realized that most of what he shared had already been made public through news reports over the years. The man was just 16 at the time of the murder and had lived across the street from Amy, was investigated thoroughly. His fingerprints and DNA were tested, but no matches were found. With no physical evidence linking him to the crime, he was ultimately released. Still, his eerie claim had an unintended consequence. It revived interest in the long-cold case. Detectives began re-interviewing individuals from Amy's circle, especially those who had run into legal trouble over the years. But despite their renewed efforts, the case once again ran cold. No arrests, no closure. Nearly a decade later, in 2011, hope stirred again, this time from an unlikely source. A group of Amy's friends created a Facebook memorial page titled, "Remembering Amy." The page attracted attention and reignited public interest in her unsolved murder. One detective assigned to the cold case unit, unfamiliar with social media, asked his colleague Detective Bill Carter for help printing out information from the page. What began as a simple favor soon became something more. Though his specialty wasn't homicide, Carter felt drawn to Amy's case. In his own time, he began digging into the file page by page, photo by photo. He reviewed every piece of evidence, cross-checked school attendance records from the day of the murder, and examined a list of people who attended Amy's funeral, using a specialized database. Carter input key details and stumbled upon something that had been overlooked for years. Several friends of Amy's brother had never been interviewed by police. Their DNA had never been collected. It was a lead, one that had somehow slipped through the cracks. Determined to leave no stone unturned, Carter reached out to the Widener family and Amy's old friends in hopes of gathering new names. Maybe the path to justice had been there all along, waiting to be seen. Despite Gloria Widener's deep fears and the trauma left in the wake of her daughter Amy's murder, she and her family had no choice but to remain in their home. Financial limitations made moving impossible, forcing them to live in the very place that had been the scene of an unthinkable crime. Amy's friends, too, were haunted. Convinced that the killer could still be among them, some insisted their parents board up windows or reinforce doors. They were teenagers, but now they lived with adult-sized fears. One afternoon, Gloria returned home expecting to find her younger daughters back from school, but something felt off. The house was silent, too silent. Their shoes were still by the door, but her calls echoed unanswered. With every step up the staircase, her anxiety deepened. She braced herself for the worst. To her immense relief, she found the girls nearly asleep in their room safe, unaware of the dread that had gripped their mother. As Emily, Amy's daughter, grew older, she remained blissfully unaware of what she'd witnessed. She had no memory of the police interviews or the tragedy that had shattered her family. Still, detectives revisited the Widners from time to time, reigniting the pain they were trying to leave behind. Eventually, Gloria begged them to stop. She needed peace, not reminders. Narration, transition tone then. In 2002, 13 years after Amy Widener's murder, the case took a strange turn. The Indianapolis Police Department received a call from a 29-year-old man who claimed he had a dream in which Amy Widener had spoken to him. He described details of her murder, but most of what he said had already been reported in the media. He had lived across the street from Amy's house in 1989. Investigators took the call seriously. They collected his DNA and fingerprints but found no match to the crime scene. The man was ultimately ruled out, but the tip brought something important: renewed attention. Detectives reopened Amy's cold case and began re-interviewing her acquaintances, especially those who'd had roots with the law in the years since. Still, no new leads emerged. Narration pause. Shift to 2011, 9 years later. In 2011, Amy's friends created a Facebook page called Remembering Amy, reviving public interest in the unsolved case. Detective Carter, unfamiliar with Facebook, asked a colleague to print posts from the group. Something about Amy's story drew Carter in, though. His specialty was investigating non-homicide crimes. He found himself staying late to pore over the files, studying the autopsy, the crime scene photos. The suspect lists every overlooked detail. He went as far as re-examining school attendance records from the day of the murder and the names of people who attended Amy's funeral. And then, he found it. In a 2003 police note, Amy's ex-boyfriend Tony, who was also the father of her daughter, Emily, had casually mentioned someone named Rodney Denk, a friend of Amy's older brother, John Paul. Strangely, Rodney had never been interviewed, never submitted a DNA sample, never even come up in the original 1989 investigation. Narration music builds softly. In 2012, Carter received formal approval to take on the case. He set out to find Rodney Denk. Rodney, now 40, still lived near the Widners, sharing a home with his mother. He worked at an auto parts store. He had been divorced and had a son with whom he had little contact. Carter went to the residence and left his card. That evening, Rodney called him back. They scheduled a meeting. Rodney seemed cooperative, but when Carter returned, Rodney was gone. Suspicious, Carter pulled Rodney's criminal record. He found past charges: assault in 1991 and theft in 1997. Because of those priors, Rodney's fingerprints were already in the system. Carter submitted them for comparison against the bloody palm print left on Amy's bed. Narration pause. The results were conclusive. It was a match. After 23 years, police had their suspect, but Rodney had disappeared again. Using his recent credit card activity, POLICE tracked a rental car with OnStar installed. The signal led them to a home in Indianapolis. There, Rodney was found hiding out at a friend's house. When officers confronted him, Rodney pulled a knife, shouting that he was innocent. He injured himself in the struggle. Officers subdued him with a taser and took him into custody. Narration shift to calm tone. Over the course of 2 hospital interrogations recorded on camera, Rodney confessed to the murder of Amy Widener. He claimed he had broken into the home to steal, assuming Amy wouldn't be there because she had been sick. But he was startled by her presence and, in a panic, grabbed a nearby object and struck her. Rodney's story shifted throughout the interviews. At one point, he claimed someone named Bag had been with him, an alleged accomplice he could neither describe nor clearly recall. He insisted he hadn't heard Amy's daughter, Emily, and didn't know she'd been in the house. His demeanor was calm, eerily polite, far from what one might expect from a confessed killer. Perhaps the 23 years had numbed him. DNA taken from Rodney was submitted for testing. It matched the samples taken in 1989 from Amy's bedsheets and blanket. Narration somber tone. The Widner family was stunned. Rodney Denk wasn't a stranger. He had been John Paul's close friend, had visited their home countless times, and even mourned alongside them at Amy's funeral. Gloria was especially shaken to learn that Rodney had signed the guest book at the service. Detective Carter also uncovered something even more disturbing. Rodney's biological son, Dylan Denk, had been incarcerated for murder in 2009. At just 16, Dylan had killed his own mother, Rodney's, exclaiming she had been abusive. Closing lines. Reflection. Tone. 2 generations, 2 violent acts. The sins of the father, and the tragedy that echoed years later. After decades of silence, the truth about Amy Widener's final moments had finally come to light. But for her family, the loss was as raw as it had ever been. Justice had arrived. Late, but it had arrived. After 23 years of silence, Detective Bill Carter revisited the Amy Wagner case with fresh eyes and renewed determination. One of his earliest steps was to collect DNA samples from individuals previously overlooked during the 1989 investigation. Police had initially canvassed the Wagners' neighborhood, taking down names of residents, friends, and acquaintances. During interviews, Amy's friends recalled familiar faces, but one name stood out to Carter: Rodney Denk. Rodney had been a friend of Amy's older brother, John Paul. The two often spent time together biking and fishing. When questioned, John Paul described Rodney as quiet and reserved, a man who kept to himself and never raised suspicion. Rodney, now 40, was living with his mother near the Wagners' former home. He worked at an auto parts store, had been divorced for years, and had a grown son with whom he had little contact. When Carter first visited, Rodney wasn't home, but his mother greeted the detective and promised to pass along his card. That evening, Rodney called back, and Carter arranged to meet with him. But when Carter returned, Rodney had disappeared. A background check revealed Rodney had prior arrests, an assault charge in 1991 and a theft in 1997. His fingerprints were already on file. When matched against the bloody palm print found at the scene in 1989, the results were damning. It was a match. The case had finally identified a suspect, but now Rodney was missing. Investigators tracked his credit card activity and learned he had rented a car equipped with an OnStar tracking system. That vehicle was soon located in Indianapolis. Police found Rodney at a friend's house. When officers approached, Rodney brandished a knife, shouting claims of innocence. He injured himself in the process and attempted to attack officers, but was subdued with a taser and taken into custody at the hospital. Rodney was interviewed over 2 days. A conversation recorded in full. He confessed to killing Amy Wagner. He claimed he had broken into the house to steal something and hadn't expected anyone to be home. When Amy confronted him, he panicked, grabbed a nearby object, and struck her. He said the blow was unintentional but fatal. Rodney's recollections were vague and disjointed. He blamed the lapse in memory on the decades that had passed. At one point, he introduced a mysterious accomplice, a man named Bag, but could offer no description or details about this person's existence. According to Rodney, Bag had waited outside, then entered the house with him, and together they encountered Amy. Yet when pressed, Rodney couldn't explain how or why this person vanished from the narrative. He also denied seeing or hearing Amy's toddler daughter, Emily, who had been present in the house during the attack. Emily, miraculously, remained physically unharmed. Despite the shocking confession, Rodney maintained a calm, polite demeanor throughout the behavior that unsettled investigators. His DNA was collected and compared to the samples found on Amy's bedsheet and blanket back in 1989. Once again, the results confirmed a match. The Wagner family was stunned. Rodney Dink hadn't been a stranger. He was a familiar face, a neighbor, a friend of the family. He had attended Amy's funeral, offered condolences, and signed the guest book. The betrayal ran deep. Detective Carter later discovered that Rodney had first been mentioned back in 2003, when Amy's former boyfriend and Emily's biological father, Tony Abomi, recalled that Rodney used to frequently visit the Wagners' home. Somehow, in the original investigation, Rodney had evaded suspicion completely. He wasn't questioned or flagged as a person of interest. While digging deeper into Rodney's past, Carter uncovered another disturbing detail. Rodney's biological son, Dylan Dink, was serving a prison sentence for murder in 2009 at just 16 years old. Dylan had beaten his mother, Mary McHenry, to death with a baseball bat, claiming years of emotional abuse as his motive. Dylan turned 17 days after the crime. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to 20 years. His release is expected in 2020, not at the age of 37. The parallel between father and son both committing brutal crimes at nearly the same age was deeply unsettling to those involved in the investigation. As Rodney's trial approached, he changed his story. Just 10 days before proceedings began, in June 2013, he recanted the claim of an accomplice. He admitted that he acted alone in Amy Wagner's murder. Rodney Dink was sentenced to 65 years in prison to honor Amy's memory. The Wagner family gathered with Detective Carter on the 24th anniversary of Amy's death. They released 24 balloons into the sky, one for every year without her. They publicly thanked Carter, who had identified Rodney as the killer within just 12 days of reopening the case. Carter was awarded for his work in January 2014 by the Indianapolis Police Department, though offered a role in the homicide division. He chose to remain in his current position. Amy's daughter, Emily Wagner, grew into a resilient young woman. She graduated from the same high school her mother once attended, later moving to California for college and new opportunities. Amy's mother, Gloria, never left the house where the tragedy took place, though the pain of loss remains. The room once belonging to Amy now hosts her grandchildren during holidays, filling the home with laughter and life once again. Karina Vetrano was a young woman with a bright future. After earning advanced degrees in speech pathology from St. John's University, she dedicated herself to helping children with autism. She had a passion for travel, writing, and especially running, a love she shared with her father Philip, which brought them closer than ever. He remembered how protectively he had scrutinized Karina's boyfriends, always hoping she'd find a love strong enough to build a family like the one he and his wife Kathy had built. The day Karina didn't return from her run felt endless. As Philip approached the house, he paused at the door, took a breath, and entered. He didn't need to explain anything. Kathy read the devastation on his face. She rushed to him, weeping, and embraced her husband. The Vetrano family's world had just been shattered. As the news spread, Karina's friends and extended family were stunned. It wasn't just that she was gone, it was how she died. The crime scene told a grim story. Karina had been brutally attacked while jogging through Spring Creek Park in Queens. Despite the violence she endured, she fought back fiercely. Her hands were clenched even in death. Her body bore bruises, abrasions, and signs of sexual assault. Her clothes were torn. Forensic analysis revealed that the back of her skull had been struck with a blunt object, likely a stone. But it wasn't blunt force that killed her, it was asphyxiation. Marks around her neck told of a violent struggle. She had tried to claw her way out of her attacker's grip, biting, scratching, anything to survive. Grass and dirt were found under her fingernails, clear signs of resistance. Not long after, another body was found in Princeton, Massachusetts. Another young woman, also a jogger, attacked in a secluded area. The similarities between the two cases triggered fears of a serial predator, but when DNA samples from both scenes were tested, the connection vanished. The attacks were unrelated. Statistically, most homicides are committed by someone known to the victim. Investigators didn't rule anything out. They tested the DNA of Karina's father and family members. All came back negative. She had no known enemies, no threats, no troubled relationships. The motive, it seemed, was entirely opportunistic, an attack by a stranger in a remote area. With few leads, the NYPD offered a $10,000 reward for information. Hundreds of leads came in. More than 600 DNA tests were conducted. Over 1,700 reports were filed, but none led to the killer. It seemed as though the attacker had no criminal record, no trace in the system. Then, on August 31, 2016, a utility worker came forward. He had been in a restricted part of the park on the day Karina was murdered. He saw a man suddenly bolt from the bushes and flee. Based on his description, police created a sketch and circulated it publicly, but nothing came of it. In December 2016, the FBI joined the investigation. Their profilers suggested the killer was familiar with the park, likely someone local. He had chosen a place with dense foliage and isolation, perfect for ambushing someone unseen. But even screenings of local men yielded no results, and then came a name: Chanel Lewis. Lewis, a young man living in East New York, Brooklyn, only a few miles from Spring Creek Park, had a background that didn't initially scream suspect. He had no criminal record and had graduated from a private school for emotionally and behaviorally challenged youth. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Chanel was often bullied, isolated, and considered a loner. Some peers remembered him fondly. Others recounted troubling statements from his past, including a disturbing middle school remark about harming girls, though no official disciplinary reports backed that claim. It raised concern when revisited years later. He lived with his mother, sisters, and their children when things got tense at home. He often wandered the streets, frequently heading to the park. It was NYPD Detective John Russo who made the connection. Months earlier, he had seen a young man always in a hoodie loitering in the park and lingering near homes. Russo had once tried to follow him, suspecting he was casing the neighborhood for theft, when a store owner reported someone suspicious matching that same description. The name Chanel Lewis popped up again. Investigators discovered that on the day of Karina's murder, Chanel had left home after an argument. When he returned, he was visibly scratched and bruised, with torn clothes. He told his mother he'd been assaulted. The timeline fit, the injuries matched, and suddenly, after months of dead ends, the NYPD had a potential breakthrough. The day after, Chanel Lewis came home with cuts and an injured hand. The school principal took him to the hospital for treatment. Investigators later reviewed his medical records from that visit. The explanation of physical altercation with unknown individuals seemed plausible at the time. But in hindsight, the injuries bore an eerie resemblance to the struggle Karina Vetrano endured. On February 4, 2017, Chanel Lewis voluntarily accompanied detectives to the police station. He agreed to provide a DNA sample. Investigators were cautious after all. How many guilty individuals would willingly hand over their DNA? The next morning, on February 5th, the interrogation began. Initially quiet, Lewis admitted that he had been in Spring Creek Park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016. He claimed he was simply walking along the dirt paths, listening to music, trying to clear his mind after a family argument. But as the questioning continued, his story shifted. When asked if anything had happened during his walk, Lewis hesitated, then nodded. Yes, he said quietly. I met a woman alone. He went on to describe following Karina Vetrano as she jogged past him. I grabbed her by the shoulders and threw her to the ground, he confessed. Then I hit her in the face about 5 times so she couldn't scream. His account matched what police already knew. Karina had lost teeth during the attack, and Lewis himself had suffered an injured hand. The details aligned too closely to be coincidence. He said the attack lasted about 5 minutes. Karina fought fiercely, biting, clawing, resisting with everything she had. Lewis described dragging her off the path into the tall grass, attempting to undress and assault her. When she continued to fight back, he strangled her until she stopped moving. Asked if he had known her beforehand, he said no. It all happened by chance, he stated. The motive he offered was chillingly unexpected. According to Lewis, loud music blaring from a local gang member's car earlier that day had triggered a deep anger one he couldn't control. That rage, he claimed, was redirected at the first vulnerable person he encountered. Detectives were skeptical of such a strange explanation. They believed a more likely scenario was that Lewis had seen Karina in the park before, maybe while she ran with her father. Perhaps he'd developed an interest in her. Maybe when she ignored or rejected him, something inside him snapped. But, motive aside, the science was indisputable. DNA testing confirmed that the microscopic traces found on Karina's body and cell phone belonged to Chanel Lewis. With this, the police and prosecutors were confident the case was closed, and they were ready for court. On November 5, 2018, Chanel Lewis went on trial. Despite confessing earlier, he now pleaded not guilty, a position strongly supported by his family, who maintained his innocence. The prosecution charged him with murder and sexual assault. Facing a sentence of 25 years to life, the case quickly drew public attention and controversy. Lewis' defense team accused police of racial profiling and legal misconduct. They, along with some media outlets, alleged the entire investigation was tainted by bias. The judge, however, dismissed those claims as unfounded, affirming that police had followed lawful procedures. The prosecution presented overwhelming forensic evidence, including DNA matches. Forensic biologist Linda Rosano testified that the probability of the DNA belonging to someone other than Chanel Lewis was 1 in 6 trillion. They also introduced internet searches Lewis made in the weeks after Karina's death, topics like second chances and Catholic forgiveness. Prosecutors suggested this hinted at a man seeking redemption for an unforgivable act. But the defense pushed back hard. They claimed Lewis's confession was coerced. The video only began recording after extensive questioning, raising concerns about what was said or done off camera. They also alleged that police violated search protocols at Lewis' home and rushed to pin the crime on him under intense public pressure. Their argument appeared to sway the jury. On November 21, 2018, after days of deliberation, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict. The judge declared a mistrial. A retrial was scheduled for January 2019, but delayed until March. This time, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. Chanel Lewis was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Even then, the defense sought to delay justice. They cited an anonymous tip alleging juror misconduct and suggested the jury had been improperly pressured, but none of it changed the outcome. What began as a seemingly straightforward case soon exploded into a national debate of a race, over due process, over how police and prosecutors pursue justice when a community demands answers. Karina Vetrano's brutal murder left a scar on an entire city. For many, it was a wake-up call, a grim reminder of how suddenly violence can shatter even the most ordinary moments. Like an evening jog, the tragic case of Nancy Paola Reyes Gores, a dream turned nightmare, the pursuit of happiness and a better life often leads people far from home, across oceans, across cultures, in search of something more. But for many, the dream they chase turns into a nightmare. Such was the tragic story of Nancy Paula Reyes Gores, a young Guatemalan mother of two whose quest for opportunity in Spain ended not with success, but with betrayal, violence, and death. Nancy's story resonated across Spain and Guatemala, shaking communities to their core. Born on April 13, 1991, in the small village of Granados, Guatemala, she was the second of 5 children in a family struggling with poverty. Her parents, Jorge and Prina Gores, worked tirelessly to ensure their children had access to education and opportunities they themselves never had. Despite the odds, Nancy excelled. She enrolled at a university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. A dedicated student, she graduated with honors. But in Guatemala, academic success didn't always guarantee financial security. She took a job as a cashier in a supermarket and was eventually promoted to administrator. However, her career stalled there. During her university years, Nancy entered an unofficial relationship with a man whose name remains undisclosed in public records and had 2 daughters. The relationship eventually fell apart, and the children's father abandoned them, offering no financial or emotional support. Nancy moved back in with her parents and continued working, now supporting not only herself, but also her daughters. But, despite her efforts, her family's financial situation remained bleak. Then, in 2013, her older sister moved to the United States, eventually settling down and thriving. Inspired by her sister's success, Nancy made the life-changing decision to emigrate, but instead of America, she chose Spain. It took years of saving and hard work, but by the summer of 2018, Nancy had finally scraped together enough money for a one-way ticket to Madrid. She promised her parents she would call regularly and send money home, and she kept that promise. After a short stay in Madrid and a period in Barcelona, she relocated to Ciudad in the heart of Spain. There, Nancy began working small, cleaning jobs and caring for the elderly, slowly building a new life while sending financial support to her family back in Guatemala. She never complained. In fact, she often told her family that, despite the hardships, Europe offered opportunities Guatemala never could. She hoped to bring her daughters to Spain someday, once she had saved enough for a proper home by early 2020. Nancy finally opened up about her personal life. She had met a man named Carlos Andres Bustamante while searching for housing. Their relationship quickly progressed, and the couple moved in together. Carlos, just a year older than Nancy, was unemployed and lived off small gigs. Nancy, again, was the sole breadwinner, covering rent, bills, and even Carlos's personal expenses. Still, she never complained to her family. On the surface, everything appeared fine. Nancy's youngest brother, Dennis, who had also moved to Spain, met Carlos and initially found him likable. But the relationship soon took a darker turn. Around June 2020, Nancy and Carlos moved to the coastal city of Santander. Nancy mentioned in phone calls that the job market looked better there, and the climate was more pleasant. But beneath the surface, their relationship was crumbling. Carlos became increasingly jealous, controlling, and violent. He had no career ambitions, drank heavily, and used drugs. Despite repeated promises to change, his behavior worsened, especially after Nancy discovered she was pregnant. While Carlos initially expressed joy at the pregnancy, his actions didn't reflect his words. He continued abusing substances, draining Nancy's finances, and began physically abusing her, a fact she tried to hide from her family. The warning signs intensified on the night of August 12, 2020, during a video call with her parents. They heard Carlos yelling at Nancy in the background, demanding to know who she was talking to. When she said it was her mother, he didn't believe her. Moments later, he grabbed her phone, and the screen went black. That was the last time Nancy's family saw her alive. Carlos snatched the phone from Nancy's hands, demanding to know who she was speaking to. When he saw it was her mother on the screen, he tossed the device onto a nearby chair and stormed off. The following day, the same unsettling scene played out again, this time with more aggression. He insulted Nancy, accused her of lying, and even threatened her. Frightened, Nancy later tried to downplay the events during a call with her family, brushing it off as simple jealousy and assuring them that everything was fine. But her parents were growing increasingly concerned. They urged her to go to the police. Nancy declined. She insisted she could manage it. She just needed time. Then came a chilling moment. On August 17th, during a rare candid call with her sister, Nancy made a disturbing confession. She said that if anything ever happened to her, or if she suddenly turned up dead, Carlos would be the only one to blame. She didn't go into details. She simply asked her sister to look after her children if the worst came to pass. It was the last time her voice was heard. The disappearance on August 20th. At around 2 p.m., Nancy texted her father, promising to call him later that evening. But she never did. She didn't call the next day either. She didn't respond to messages. She didn't answer her phone. It was completely unlike her. Her family's unease turned into panic. They tried reaching Carlos, but his phone went unanswered. Since Nancy and Carlos had just moved to Santander and knew no one in the area, and because her brothers lived across the country, there was no one immediately available to check in on her. A few days later, a message came from Carlos's phone. He claimed he and Nancy had argued, and that she'd packed her belongings and left in search of a new apartment. According to him, she was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she was. Nancy's brothers urged Carlos to return to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and report her missing. Carlos agreed, but never showed up. He never filed the report. Then he disappeared altogether. The mother's confession left with no choice. Nancy's family filed the missing person report themselves. Meanwhile, through a friend of Nancy's, her brothers were able to track down Carlos's mother, Sandra Bustamante. When they showed up at her door, explained who they were, and asked if she had seen her son, Sandra broke down in tears. She admitted something horrifying. She feared her son had done something terrible. She didn't elaborate much, but said she hadn't heard from Carlos in days. He had only sent cryptic texts asking her not to ask questions and to give him space. Sandra confessed she had always liked Nancy, but she also knew her son far too well. The next day, police brought Sandra in for questioning. She shared the same concerns she'd voiced to Nancy's brothers, and handed over a troubling text message Nancy had sent her shortly before vanishing. In the message, Nancy begged Sandra not to give Carlos any more money, no matter what sob story he told. He would only spend it on alcohol and drugs, Nancy wrote. And when he was under the influence, he became aggressive, dangerously so. She said he had no intention of getting a job or changing. She feared for her safety. She was pregnant, and she was thinking of leaving him. Nancy ended the message with haunting clarity. It was better to walk away now before someone got hurt. The history of violence as investigators dug deeper, an even darker picture of Carlos Andres began to emerge. He had a long history of violence and aggression, going back to his teenage years. His first known victim, his own mother. At just 17, he had beaten her so badly that she had him arrested. He was sentenced to probation, but that wasn't the end of it. After leaving home, Carlos continued down a violent path. He had served multiple short stints in prison, each related to assaults on women he had lived with. Every one of his relationships ended in violence, control, and abuse. Nancy's was no different. In fact, as authorities were about to learn, it may have been the most tragic of them all. Title: The Vanishing of Nancy Gores, a Jealous Partner. A horrific crime for weeks. Nancy Gores had tried to keep the peace in her home, but fear had quietly replaced affection. On one occasion, her partner Carlos abruptly snatched her phone from her hands, examined the screen without a word, then tossed the device onto a nearby chair and walked away. The next day, it happened again, only this time, he insulted her, demanded to know who she was talking to, and even threatened her. Though shaken, Nancy tried to calm her worried family. She reassured them that Carlos was simply jealous, that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But behind closed doors, the situation was far more dire than anyone imagined. On August 17th, during a tense phone call with her sister, Nancy made a chilling remark. "If anything happens to me," she said, "or if I suddenly die, Carlos will be the one responsible." She didn't explain further. She only begged her sister to care for her children if something went wrong. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. The disappearance 3 days later, on August 20th, Nancy sent a casual text to her father, promising to call later that evening, but the call never came. She didn't respond the next day either. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread, alarmed. Her family tried reaching Carlos, but he too had gone silent. The couple had recently moved to the coastal city of Santander and had no close contacts in the area. Nancy's brothers, located across the country, couldn't check on her in person. The distance only amplified their fear. Then, a strange message arrived from Carlos's phone. He claimed the two had argued and broken up. According to him, Nancy packed her belongings and left to find a new place, ignoring his calls ever since. When Nancy's brothers asked him to meet them and go to the police together to report her missing, Carlos agreed, but he never showed. Instead, he vanished, cutting off all communication. The mother's confession desperate for answers. Nancy's brothers tracked down Carlos's mother, Sandra Bustamante. When they visited her, she broke down in tears. Sandra admitted she had long feared her son was capable of doing something terrible. She hadn't heard from Carlos either, only receiving vague, cryptic messages, asking her not to ask questions and to give him time. The next day, Sandra was questioned by police. She shared everything she knew and also handed over a message Nancy had sent her days before disappearing. In it, Nancy begged Sandra not to give Carlos any more money, no matter how desperate he sounded. Nancy revealed Carlos was spending it all on alcohol and drugs. Under the influence, he became violent and uncontrollable. She ended the message by saying she was seriously thinking of leaving him before someone gets hurt. A pattern of violence. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing past emerged. Carlos had a history of violent behavior, dating back to when he was 17. His first known victim, his own mother. He received probation for beating her, but the violence didn't stop there. Over the years, he served multiple short sentences for domestic abuse against other women. At the same time, more was revealed about Nancy. Despite what she had told her family, she was not working only as a housekeeper or caregiver. The money she regularly sent home far exceeded what those jobs could provide. Nancy, a striking Guatemalan woman, had been working as an escort, catering to wealthy clients. Carlos had always known Nan, initially accepted it because it meant he didn't have to work. But once she became pregnant, jealousy consumed him. He questioned the paternity and resented that she continued working. Yet, when money ran out, he pressured her to keep going. The apartment and the evidence. Nancy and Carlos had not been seen for days. Then, on August 26th, police finally obtained a warrant to search their apartment. What they found was horrifying. Blood was everywhere on the walls, in the kitchen, and most notably in the bathroom. Some attempts had been made to clean it up, but the effort was superficial. Inside the clogged drains, investigators found fragments of bones, hair, tissue, and internal organs. Forensic analysis confirmed it all belonged to Nancy. Although her full remains were missing, it was clear what had happened. Nancy had been brutally murdered, dismembered in the apartment bathroom. A package from a recently purchased hatchet, complete with Carlos's fingerprints, was found inside. Surveillance footage showed him buying the hatchet, gloves, and large trash bags on August 20th. He was also seen purchasing a cart at a local market recognized by the vendor who sold it to him. The arrest on August 27th, in a bizarre twist, Carlos showed up at a police station in Madrid, trying to report Nancy as missing. He claimed they had argued, she had left, and he hadn't seen her since. Police didn't buy it. He was arrested on the spot. Carlos insisted on his innocence. He claimed someone else must have harmed Nancy after she returned to the apartment, but evidence kept mounting. Nancy's blood was found on his clothing and shoes. Despite his efforts to wash it away, using cell phone data, investigators traced Carlos's movements between August 20th and 26th. He had traveled along the coast, visiting multiple cities. Security cameras captured him walking toward a forested park with a cart full of bags, and later returning with the cart visibly lighter. From there, he was seen heading toward a steep cliff beyond the rail line. The grim discovery on September 16th. After nearly a month of searching, authorities located a group of trash bags in a thickly wooded area near the cliff. Inside were the dismembered remains of Nancy Gores. Her body had been chopped into 20 pieces, with a hatchet the same one Carlos was seen purchasing. But one crucial piece was missing. Nancy had been 4 months pregnant. No trace of the fetus was found in any of the recovered remains. Forensic examiners revealed severe mutilation of the victim's lower abdomen, indicating that the fetus had likely been removed intentionally and disposed of separately. Conclusion: despite continued denials, conflicting stories, and attempts to mislead, Carlos Bustamante could not escape the truth. Blood, fingerprints, surveillance footage, and a mountain of forensic evidence painted the true picture. On August 20th, following a heated argument, Carlos likely strangled Nancy in their kitchen. He then dragged her body into the bathroom, where he used a hatchet to dismember her. Over the following days, he systematically disposed of her remains. Her final message to his mother now haunts those who read it. It's better to end this before someone gets hurt, but it was already too late. Carlos Bustamante went shopping at a hardware store and a local market. In the bathroom of his apartment, he used a saw and a large kitchen knife to dismember Nancy's body into 20 parts. He placed the remains into bags, loaded them onto a cart, and waited until nightfall. Under the cover of darkness, he wheeled the cart deep into a nearby park, following a pre-planned route. He scattered the bags across various hidden locations, hoping they would never be discovered. Trial and sentencing to this day. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied any involvement in the crime, insisting that he had loved her. Yet, from the moment of the murder until his eventual arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he had stolen from Nancy. He drifted from city to city, spending lavishly in bars as if nothing had happened. The investigation was long and painstaking. It took law enforcement nearly 2 years to gather enough evidence and track down witnesses. Carlos's trial finally began in July 2022. In November of that year, he was found guilty of the premeditated and brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many felt that the punishment did not match the severity of the crime. Bustamante received a sentence of 25 years and 2 months in prison. He was also ordered to pay 150,000 euros in compensation to Nancy's parents and her daughters. The disappearance of Katrina Shadeen was born on September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the youngest of 2 children, born to Alan and Linda Shadeen. When Drew was just 3 years old, her parents divorced, though they remained on good terms. From the age of 10, Drew and her older brother Sven were raised by their mother and her second husband, Sid Walker, in a comfortable lakeside home near Whitefish Lake, a picturesque vacation destination. Drew thrived in high school. She was an honor student, a member of the golf team, and was even crowned homecoming queen in 1999. but it was art that truly captured her heart. Her bedroom was filled with sketches of celebrities, models, and her closest friends. After graduation, Drew enrolled at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, described by friends as full of life and always willing to help others. Drew had a dream of traveling to Australia in the spring of 2004 to save up for the trip. She worked 2 jobs, one at Victoria's Secret, the other as a waitress at a local nightclub. The day she vanished on Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew finished her shift at Victoria's Secret in Columbia Mall at around 4 p.m. before heading to her next job at the nightclub. She stopped to do a bit of shopping and purchased a purse. As she walked through the mall's parking lot toward her car, she called her boyfriend, Chris Lang. During the call, Drew suddenly said, "Okay, before the line went dead. Chris didn't think much of it at the time. There was nothing urgent in their conversation, and dropped calls weren't unusual. He didn't call back. 3 hours later, his phone rang again. It was Drew's number, but when Chris picked up, all he could hear was the wind and the sound of buttons being pressed. No voice, no words. It was haunting. Later, in a television interview, Chris recalled, "I didn't sense anything wrong at the time. It felt like a normal call being dropped. Never in a million years did I imagine that something terrible had just happened." The search begins. Drew lived in a college dorm with her roommate, Meg Murphy. That evening, Meg received a call from Drew's nightclub employer. Drew hadn't shown up for her shift and wasn't answering her phone, highly uncharacteristic of her. Worried, Meg began calling friends and eventually the local hospital, but Drew hadn't been admitted. Around 9 p.m., Meg contacted the police. Knowing she had worked at the mall earlier, officers were sent there to investigate. By the time police arrived, the mall had already closed. But in the parking lot, they found Drew's car. The vehicle was unlocked, with no visible signs of a struggle. A black nylon sheath from a folding knife lay nearby. It was unclear if it was connected, but it raised red flags. Inside the car were Drew's new purse, her wallet, and paperwork. Nothing had been stolen. This didn't look like a robbery. Friends, family, and even Chris had no idea where she could be. Police began to suspect a kidnapping. The investigation. Lang was one of the first people investigated, but he was quickly ruled out. He was in Minnesota, over 300 miles from Grand Forks at the time. He told investigators about the 2 phone calls, one that ended abruptly, and the second that played only wind and button noises. The following day, detectives returned to Columbia Mall. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the parking lot, but there were cameras inside the mall. Reviewing the footage, they located Drew around 4:55 p.m., casually shopping and purchasing the purse. She was calm and unhurried, wearing a pink sweater and holding her jacket. At 5 p.m., she made the call to Chris. At 5:04 p.m., it was cut off. To test a theory, one detective retraced her path from the store to the parking lot, walking slowly while timing it for 4 minutes, the exact length of the phone call. When the timer ended, he stood near Drew's parked car. It confirmed a chilling possibility. Drew had been abducted just as she reached her vehicle. Public outcries. Word of Drew's disappearance spread. Media coverage intensified. People across the country began following her story, with many refusing to stay silent. Volunteers searched, friends organized vigils, and investigators followed every lead. But the mystery of what happened in those final moments in the mall parking lot still haunts the community to this day. Despite the brutal cold and unforgiving terrain, hope kept the search alive. In addition to police and FBI agents, more than 1,000 volunteers joined the search for Drew Shaden. The last known signal from her cell phone was traced to the tiny town of Fisher, Minnesota, just a 30-minute drive from the Columbia Mall, where she was last seen, as seen on the map. The area between Grand Forks and Fisher is largely composed of open farmland. Police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, search dogs, and even horses to comb through the vast fields. Property owners were asked to inspect their land, barns, and storage areas, but despite their efforts, nothing conclusive was found in the early days. The search radius widened with each passing hour. Then, 4 days after Drew vanished, an ominous discovery was made. Under a bridge in the nearby town of Crookston, a single boot was found. It was confirmed by her roommate, and later forensically verified, to belong to Drew. The same boots she had worn on the day of her disappearance. Crookston, with fewer than 10,000 residents, lies about 30 miles from where Drew was abducted. Despite extensive efforts, the Crookston area yielded no further clues. Initially, a $22,000 reward was offered for information leading to Drew's location. That figure quickly grew to $140,000, signaling the urgency and desperation of those involved. A break in the investigation with no solid leads on Drew's location. Investigators returned to the Columbia Mall's surveillance footage, but this time, they weren't watching Drew, they were watching everyone else. They theorized that whoever had taken her might have been seen lurking in the background. Maybe someone had been watching her. Maybe someone else had been followed. That same day, hours of footage revealed a man wandering the mall aimlessly. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't speaking to anyone. His eyes darted from person to person. At 3:41 p.m., he sat on a bench near one of the mall's exits. For 10 minutes, he watched people come and go. Then, he stood up and walked out, black gloves. As he passed under a security camera in the lobby, he looked directly into it. This chilling shot was taken exactly 72 minutes before Drew's final phone call was abruptly cut off. Investigators paid close attention to his behavior. He didn't leave until a blonde woman pushing a shopping cart passed by him, heading for the parking lot. He trailed behind her. Detectives believed this wasn't a coincidence. He appeared to be targeting her. This woman was never identified, but police speculated that Drew may not have been the intended victim, at least, not initially. The resemblance between the two women was enough to suggest that the man had a particular victim type in mind. If he had failed to abduct the first woman, Drew might have been his second, opportunistic target. She had left the mall shortly after 5 p.m. Darkness had already fallen, and that likely worked in the abductor's favor. Connecting the dots by this point, 3 cities were tied to the case. Grand Forks, where Drew vanished. Fisher, where her phone last pinged. Crookston, where her boot was found. Using this geographic triangle, the FBI began examining files of all registered sex offenders in and around those regions. Then came a breakthrough. One name stood out: Alfonso Rodriguez Jotera. He fit the physical profile captured on the mall footage. More importantly, he had a long and violent history involving women. Rodriguez was 50 years old at the time and had spent 23 of those years in prison for multiple sex crimes, the making of a predator born in February 1953 in Laredo, Texas. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was the second of 5 children in a family of migrant workers. His parents, Dolores and Alfonso Sr., moved frequently, chasing seasonal work. In 1963, they settled permanently in Crookston, Minnesota. Rodriguez described his upbringing as harsh and emotionally distant. His parents were demanding and critical. Coupled with his difficulty learning English and his isolation at school, Rodriguez eventually dropped out in 9th grade. He later found work as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company. He claimed to have been sexually abused by older women during his youth, an experience he blamed for his growing hatred toward women. By the age of 21, that hatred had become violent. In October 1974, he lured a woman under the pretense of needing a ride. Instead, he directed her to a remote area and tried to sexually assault her. Just 1 month later, he approached a woman sitting in her truck outside a movie theater in Crookston. Armed with a knife, he threatened her and forced her to a secluded area. The pattern was undeniably, and it was escalating. While police combed the area around Grand Forks, Over 1,000 volunteers joined the search for Drew. Even the FBI stepped in. The last signal from Drew's phone led investigators to the small town of Fisher. Minnesota's just a 30-minute drive from the Columbia Mall where she worked. A glance at the map made it clear. The terrain between these two towns was mostly open fields and farmland. Police launched an exhaustive effort. Helicopters scanned from above. All-terrain vehicles and mounted officers scoured the ground, and search dogs were deployed across asterisk properties. Landowners were urged to check their own land, but despite the intensity, no immediate leads turned up. Then, 4 days into the search, came the first chilling sign. A single boot was found under a bridge in Crookston, a town about 30 miles from Grand Forks. A roommate later confirmed that Drew had been wearing those boots the day she vanished. Forensics backed it up, it was hers. But that was it. Despite intensified searches around Crookston, there was nothing else of investigative value. Still, the community refused to give up. The reward for information was raised to $140,000. With physical leads scarce, investigators returned to the Columbia Mall's surveillance footage. This time, they weren't watching Drew, they were looking for someone who might have been watching her. They eventually spotted him, a man, wandering the mall, loitering more than shopping. At 3:41 p.m., he took a seat near an exit and watched passersby for about 10 minutes. Then, wearing black gloves, he stood and exited the mall, directly under a camera. He looked straight into it. That moment, 72 minutes before Drew's final conversation with her boyfriend, stood out. Investigators noticed that the man only moved when a blonde woman pushing a grocery cart passed by. She walked toward the parking lot. He followed. Detectives didn't think it was coincidence. They theorized this was his intended target, and that when something thwarted his plan, he waited, for the next opportunity. Drew left work around 5 p.m. after dark conditions that may have made her more vulnerable. 3 towns were now connected in the case. Grand Forks, where Drew vanished. Fisher, where her phone pinged last. Crookston, where her boot was found. FBI agents began cross-referencing all known sex offenders in the surrounding areas. Eventually, one name stood out. Alfonso Rodriguez. Julio Rodriguez fit the profile too well. He had a disturbing history of violent crimes against women. By the time of Drew's disappearance, the 50-year-old had spent 23 years behind bars. He was born in Laredo, Texas, in 1953, the second oldest of 5 children. His family moved frequently before settling in Crookston in 1963. Rodriguez described his upbringing as abusive, claiming he was constantly criticized by his parents and sexually abused by older women. He said these experiences fueled his hatred toward women. In October 1974, he lured a woman into his car and attempted to sexually assault her. Just a month later, he threatened another woman with a knife and raped her. Then, in 1979, he tried to abduct a 69-year-old English teacher out walking in Crookston. When she fought back, he stabbed her. Miraculously, she escaped, and thanks to her artistic talent, she drew a sketch that led to his arrest. Rodriguez was convicted and imprisoned, but in May 2003, he was released. Just 6 months later, Drew disappeared. Alarmingly, Rodriguez was classified as a Level 3 sex offender, the highest risk level for reoffending. His own family had warned the Minnesota Department of Corrections that they feared he would strike again. Still, he was released after serving his full sentence. At the time of Drew's disappearance, Rodriguez was living with his mother in Crookston, just miles from where her boot would be found. When questioned, Rodriguez denied involvement. He admitted to being at the Columbia Mall the day Drew vanished, and claimed to have seen the film Once Upon a Time in Mexico. But investigators quickly discovered that no theater in Grand Forks had been screening that movie that day. Then came the break investigators dreaded. A search of Rodriguez's vehicle uncovered several dried reddish stains. DNA testing confirmed it was Drew's blood. It was found on the rear window, in the back seat, and in multiple areas of the car's interior. A folding knife was discovered in the trunk. Its sheath matched one found near Drew's abandoned car. A receipt showed Rodriguez had bought that knife at a hardware store mere yards from the mall's parking lot, with no sign of Drew alive or dead. Police arrested Rodriguez on December 1, 2003, 8 days after her disappearance. He was charged with kidnapping and murder, while Rodriguez sat in silence, refusing to talk or reveal Drew's whereabouts. The search carried on. Snow blanketed the region, complicating the effort. In an unprecedented move, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota enlisted the National Guard and state employees to assist. Hundreds joined the mission, but as winter dragged on, hope began to wane. The search was suspended due to the harsh conditions. When spring arrived, so did renewed hope. As the snow thawed, searchers returned to the fields around Crookston. On April 17, 2004, 5 months after Drew vanished, her body was finally found. She had been left in a field, just a few miles from the bridge, where her boot had been discovered. The area had been searched before, but snowdrifts had concealed her remains. She was naked from the waist down. Her hands were tied behind her back. A rope was fastened tightly around her neck, and beneath it, the remnants of a plastic bag placed over her head before being tied off with the rope. A single hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Drew's jacket. Her father later said, "We were waiting for that call. And when that call came, we all stopped living for a second." It was a moment that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The young woman had endured horrific violence. She had been savagely beaten and stabbed multiple times. The medical examiner couldn't determine a single cause of death, listing 3 possibilities: a deep cut to the neck, suffocation, or hypothermia. On April 24, 2004, after months of uncertainty and agony, Drew's family finally held a memorial service to say goodbye. Around 1,500 mourners gathered that morning to pay their respects. North Dakota, where Drew had been abducted, had abolished the death penalty in 1975. Minnesota, where her body was found, also did not use capital punishment. However, since Drew had been taken across state lines, the case fell under federal jurisdiction, allowing prosecutors to seek the death penalty. On August 30, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was found guilty in Drew Shoden's murder. A few months later, on February 8, 2007, Judge Ralph Erickson addressed Rodriguez in court. He described Rodriguez's violent and senseless acts as the reason the jury had reached such a grave decision. Rodriguez was sentenced to death. He became the first person in nearly 100 years to receive the death penalty in North Dakota, after spending 6 years on death row. On June 28, 2013, Rodriguez finally admitted that he had kidnapped and murdered Drew, but the case didn't end there. In an unexpected turn of events, Judge Ralph Erickson, who had once handed down the death sentence, was now serving as a U.S. Court of Appeals judge. In 2021, he overturned Rodriguez's death sentence and ordered a new sentencing phase. His reasoning: while Rodriguez's guilt remained undisputed and was supported by multiple forms of DNA evidence, the issue was with how the death penalty had been pursued. Judge Erickson cited 2 key issues. First, that Rodriguez's defense team had failed to properly investigate his mental health, and second, that expert testimony during the trial had been misleading. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael McGee testified that Drew had been sexually violated within 24 to 36 hours of her abduction. However, no physical evidence such as seminal fluid supported that conclusion. The judge acknowledged that the expert's opinion had influenced his original decision. Despite not being grounded in direct evidence, Erickson did, however, note that even without that specific evidence, the condition in which Drew's body was found naked from the waist down, her hands bound, a rope around her neck strongly suggested a sexually motivated crime. Yet, the constitutional failures in Rodriguez's trial meant his death sentence could not stand. After the sentence was vacated, The U.S. Attorney's Office initially announced it would again seek the death penalty, but in 2023, that decision was reversed. On March 14, 2023, U.S. Attorney Max Schneider formally withdrew the government's intent to pursue capital punishment. In a public statement, Schneider expressed deep sympathy for Drew's parents, Linda Walker and Alan Shoden, describing them as courageous and compassionate individuals who had worked closely with federal authorities for nearly 2 decades. He also commended the legal teams and staff who had ensured that justice, in some form, had been served. Although the death sentence was dropped, Rodriguez remained a convicted murderer, now serving life without parole in federal custody. Mr. Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison, Schneider stated. The tragic case prompted lasting legal reforms. On July 27, 2006, President George W. Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Drew's law. This law renamed the National Sex Offender Registry in her memory. The Drew Shoden National Sex Offender public website. It allows the public to access information